Snoop wasn't planning to stop. It was just another late-night drive, music humming low, city lights flickering past his window, the kind of night where nothing big happens, just the world moving the way it always does. But when he pulled into the gas station, just needing a quick top-off before heading home, he noticed something that made him pause, a young woman standing at the register, shifting her weight, glancing down at her phone, tapping her card again, then again, then again. The cashier was already shaking his head. The line behind her was getting impatient. Someone sighed loud enough to be heard. The moment stretched. And Snoop? Snoop had already made up his mind before she even realized what was happening. It was late, but not too late, the kind of hour where the streets weren't quite empty, just quieter, where the city was still breathing, just slower. Snoop wasn't in a rush, just cruising, just letting the night ride out smooth, just another stretch of road, just another playlist rolling in the background. When the gas light blinked on, he barely noticed it at first, but he figured he might as well pull in, top off, and keep moving. The gas station wasn't busy, just a few cars at the pumps, a couple of people inside, nothing special. But as soon as he stepped out of his ride, as soon as he started walking toward the store, he felt it. A moment that wasn't his, but one he was about to step into anyway. Snoop had been in enough places, seen enough things, and felt enough moments shift in the air to know when something wasn't just a small inconvenience, but something bigger, something heavier, something that was pressing down on someone in a way they weren't prepared to handle. This wasn't just about a declined card or a short delay at the register. This was about the way the woman's entire body language changed the second she heard those words, the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers curled slightly into the strap of her purse, the way her breath caught in her throat like she was bracing herself for something she had hoped wouldn't happen. She wasn't causing a scene, wasn't making a big deal about it, wasn't even looking up at the people in line behind her, but that didn't mean she wasn't feeling the weight of every single person standing there, waiting, watching, silently hoping she would hurry up and move so they could get on with their night. The cashier, barely looking up from the screen, repeated the words like they meant nothing, like he had said them 100 times that night already, like he was ready to move on before she even had time to process what was happening. It's declined. Flat. Unbothered. A sentence that meant nothing to him but everything to her. Most people, when this happens, either get angry or get embarrassed. They either start fumbling through their wallet for another card, for cash, for something to make the moment go away as fast as possible, or they shake their head, give up, mutter something under their breath, and leave. She did neither. She just stood there for half a second too long, staring down at her phone, tapping at the screen like maybe there was a mistake, like maybe if she refreshed her banking app, the numbers would change, like maybe if she just waited another second, she wouldn't have to accept what was happening. Snoop didn't move yet, didn't say anything, just watched, because people's eyes tell you more than their words ever do. Hers were focused on the screen, but not really looking at it, because she already knew what it was going to say. It wasn't surprise in her face. It wasn't confusion. It was something quieter, something heavier, something that said this wasn't the first time, that this was just one of many moments like this, that she had already had the conversation in her head before she even walked up to the counter. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. The weight of a line full of tired people was enough on its own. A man shifted his stance, exhaled loudly through his nose. A woman further back glanced at her watch like this was just another minor inconvenience in her day, like the few extra seconds they were all spending in this moment were somehow an offense. The cashier, already moving like he had decided this interaction was over, shook his head slightly and reached for the next customer's things. She opened her mouth, as if she was about to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, maybe just a quiet, never mind, but she never got the chance. There are times when people think about doing something good, weigh it out, wonder if it's their place, hesitate for just long enough to convince themselves that someone else will handle it, that maybe they should just mind their business. Snoop wasn't one of those people. He didn't overthink it, didn't hesitate, didn't let the moment pass by and then regret it later. His feet were already moving before he even fully decided to step forward, his hand already reaching into his pocket before the thought had fully formed. People who do things for attention, for the cameras, for the validation, they make moments like this bigger than they need to be. They talk too much, they ask too many questions, they make it about themselves instead of the person who actually needs the help. Snoop wasn't that guy. He didn't make a speech. He didn't ask if she needed it. He didn't turn it into a scene. He just stepped forward, slid his card across the counter, and said the only thing that mattered. Put hers on mine. The cashier blinked, like it took him a second to understand what had just happened, like this wasn't something he saw every day. Like maybe he had been expecting the night to go one way, and now it had suddenly changed direction. The woman turned her head sharply, eyes wide, mouth parting slightly, like she was about to protest, like she was about to say no, like she didn't know how to process what had just been done for her. For a second, nobody spoke. The people in line had been waiting for her to move, for her to step aside, for the problem to resolve itself, but now they were waiting for something else. Waiting to see how she would react. Waiting to see what Snoop would say next. Waiting to understand why a man who didn't know her had just decided to fix her problem without hesitation. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the strap of her purse, her voice small when she finally managed, I was just. Snoop shook his head before she could finish, before she could make this about anything more than what it was, before she could feel like she owed something. It's all good, he said, voice smooth, effortless, like this was just another part of the night, like he had just held a door open for her instead of taking something heavy off her shoulders. Go fill up your tank, lil mama. People don't always know how to accept kindness, not when they aren't used to it, not when it comes without conditions, not when they didn't ask for it. She looked at him, at the card reader, at the cashier who was still frozen in place, then back at him again, like she was trying to figure out how to return something that couldn't be returned. I can just get a little bit, Snoop just shrugged. Now you got a full tank. She didn't have anything else to say after that, didn't try to argue, didn't try to refuse, just exhaled, slow and quiet, like she had been holding her breath for too long, like she had been waiting for someone, anyone, to just make things a little bit easier. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, eyes shining in a way that wasn't quite tears, but was close enough. The cashier finally rang up the transaction. The receipt printed. The world started moving again. And Snoop? Snoop was already stepping away, because he didn't need a thank you. He just needed to know that she was going to drive away without worrying about how far the gas in her tank would take her. Snoop had never been the type to hesitate when it came to doing the right thing, never been the kind of person who needed to weigh the pros and cons of helping someone when the solution was sitting right in his pocket, never been the guy who needed to think too long about whether stepping in was worth it because to him, it had never been about worth. It had been about the difference between walking past a moment or standing in it long enough to change it. Most people hesitate, not because they don't care, but because they convince themselves it's not their problem, because they don't want to make things uncomfortable, because they assume someone else will step in, because they think maybe it's best to mind their own business, because they tell themselves the moment will pass whether they get involved or not. But Snoop didn't see it that way, didn't process the world through a lens of hesitation or uncertainty, didn't believe in letting moments pass when he had the ability to turn them into something different. And that's why before his brain even finished recognizing that this was a moment worth stepping into, his feet were already moving, his hand was already reaching for his pocket, his body was already making the decision before he even realized it had been made. There was no rush in his steps, no urgency, no need to turn this into something dramatic or noticeable, no reason to pull attention toward himself or the situation. No desire to turn an act of kindness into a performance, because real help, the kind that matters, doesn't need an audience to exist. The space between him and the counter wasn't far, but in that short distance, he had already decided how this was going to go, had already mapped out exactly how to move so that it didn't feel like charity, didn't feel like pity, didn't make her feel small, because the goal wasn't just to fix the problem, it was to do it in a way that let her walk out of there with her head held high, with her dignity intact, without feeling like she owed anyone anything. Snoop placed his card down on the counter so smoothly, so casually, so effortlessly that for a second, the cashier didn't even register what was happening, didn't even process that the moment had just shifted, didn't fully grasp that the situation had already been solved before he had a chance to continue dismissing the woman standing in front of him. There was a flicker of hesitation in his face, the kind that comes when a routine is interrupted, when something unexpected happens, when the script of an interaction suddenly changes. But Snoop just gave him the kind of look that didn't require an explanation, didn't leave room for questions, didn't need to be backed up with extra words. She had been preparing herself for a different outcome, had already braced for the moment where she would have to shake her head, whisper an apology she didn't know, back away from the counter with that feeling in her chest. That tight, sinking, crushing weight that only comes when the world reminds you, once again, that sometimes it doesn't make room for people who need it most. But when she saw the card slide onto the counter, when she heard the quiet command in Snoop's voice, when she realized what was happening before she even had time to process it, her breath caught. Her fingers tightened on the strap of her purse, her lips parted slightly like she wanted to say something but didn't know what. A second ago, the people waiting behind her had been growing impatient, shifting their weight, sighing under their breath, looking around like they had better places to be, but now the energy had changed. Now the moment wasn't just about inconvenience. Now the people who had been silently willing her to move were watching something they hadn't expected to see. Something that was so rare in its simplicity that it made them pause, something that made them forget, if only for a second, why they had been so eager to move on in the first place. She didn't thank him right away, didn't rush to fill the space with words, didn't try to explain, didn't stumble through excuses or insist she didn't need it. She just stood there, eyes still wide, fingers still gripping the strap of her purse like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to let go, like she wasn't sure if it was okay to just accept the moment for what it was. And Snoop, never one for unnecessary words, never one to make people feel like they had to earn kindness, never one to turn something simple into something complicated, just gave her a small nod. The kind that says it's done, don't worry about it. The kind that makes it clear that this was never about looking for anything in return. The cashier hesitated for just a second longer, his fingers hovering over the keypad like maybe he should confirm, like maybe he should ask if this was really happening, like maybe he wasn't sure if he was supposed to let a moment like this go by without some kind of official acknowledgement. But then he saw the way Snoop was looking at him, calm, easy, unshaken, completely certain, and without another word, he tapped the screen, processed the payment, let the receipt print, and handed it over without another question. She took the receipt with hands that weren't shaking but weren't steady either, let her fingers brush against the thin paper like she was still trying to convince herself this was real, glanced up at Snoop one more time, her expression still somewhere between disbelief and quiet relief, and then finally, she let go of the tension in her shoulders, let out a slow breath, let herself accept the fact that just this once, the world had decided to make something easier instead of harder. Snoop didn't wait for a thank you, didn't need one, didn't stand around waiting for her to say anything else, because it wasn't about that, it had never been about that. He had done what needed to be done, had made sure she wouldn't have to walk back to her car empty-handed, wouldn't have to sit there wondering how far the fumes in her tank would take her, wouldn't have to carry that feeling of being stuck, even just for one night. So he just turned, stepped away from the counter, slid his hands into his pockets, and walked out the same way he had walked in, smooth, steady, like nothing had changed at all, even though everything had. By the time he was outside, by the time the door swung shut behind him, by the time the night air hit his face, the world had already moved forward, the line had already shuffled forward. The next transaction was already happening, life was already continuing as if the moment hadn't just stretched time, hadn't just shifted something in the air, hadn't just given someone a different ending than the one they had been expecting. But inside, behind the glass, she was still standing there, still looking down at the receipt in her hand, still holding onto something she might not have had the words for, but that didn't make it any less real. Snoop had seen all kinds of reactions in his life, shock, gratitude, disbelief, embarrassment, even frustration from people who didn't know how to accept kindness without feeling like they owed something in return. But this was different because the woman standing in front of him wasn't just reacting to the fact that someone had paid for her gas, she was reacting to the weight of a moment she hadn't expected, to the reality that someone had stepped in without hesitation, to the shift in energy. That turned a quiet struggle into a quiet relief without demanding anything in return. There was always that pause, that flicker of time between something happening and someone accepting that it had happened, that space where the mind catches up to the present, where reality settles in, where a person has to decide whether to question or accept, whether to argue or just let go. She had been holding her breath without realizing it, had been bracing for something she had already accepted as inevitable, had been preparing to step away from the counter and out into the cold, had been ready to sit in her car and try to figure out what came next. But now the problem wasn't a problem anymore, and for some reason, that was just as overwhelming as if it had been. For Snoop, it was done, transaction handled, problem solved, moment already moving past. But for her, time had stretched out, slowed down, made her hyper-aware of every little thing. The weight of the receipt in her hand, the sound of the card reader beeping its approval, the shuffle of people in line behind her who had gone from impatient to silent, the way the cashier, who had been so quick to dismiss her just seconds ago, was now standing there frozen in place, unsure whether to acknowledge what had just happened or just let it go like it was nothing. Accepting help isn't always easy, even when you need it, even when it's given without expectation, even when there's nothing attached to it but kindness, because something about it still tugs at the part of you that wants to be self-sufficient, still pulls at the feeling of wanting to handle things on your own, still whispers that you should have figured it out without anyone stepping in. And right now, Snoop could see it in her, the way her fingers clenched slightly around the strap of her purse, the way her jaw tensed like she was about to protest, the way her mind was caught between saying thank you and saying nothing at all. She tried, really tried, to speak, to find the right words, to make sure that if she said something, it would be the right thing. But what do you even say when a stranger steps in without being asked? Without making a big deal out of it, without turning it into something that requires acknowledgement? She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper when she finally managed, I was just, but even as the words left her mouth, they didn't feel necessary, because Snoop had already heard every version of them before, already knew what she was trying to say, already understood that gratitude doesn't always need to be spoken to be felt. Sometimes, kindness doesn't hit right away, doesn't land fully in the moment, doesn't register until later, when you're alone and thinking back on it, when you're sitting in your car staring at a receipt that shouldn't even be worth remembering but somehow is, when you realize that it wasn't just about the money, it was about the fact that someone saw you struggling and made sure you didn't have to. And right now, standing in that gas station, still gripping the paper that told her this moment was real, she exhaled slowly, her lips curving into the smallest smile, not forced, not rehearsed. Not the kind you put on to be polite, but the kind that comes when relief replaces stress, when the weight that was sitting on your chest just a second ago suddenly isn't there anymore. Even the cashier, who had been standing there like an extra in a scene he didn't know how to be part of, finally seemed to snap out of whatever daze he had been caught in, clearing his throat slightly as if trying to reset, to get back to normal, to pretend like this wasn't a moment he would be thinking about for the rest of the night. Your gas is good to go, he muttered, not quite looking her in the eye, because maybe he felt a little guilty, maybe he realized that he had been too quick to dismiss her, too quick to brush her aside, too quick to treat her like she was just another inconvenience in his shift, when really, she was just someone having a hard night. The thing about moments like this is that they don't just affect the people directly involved, they ripple outward, change the air, alter the energy, make the people watching feel something even if they don't know what to do with it. The same people in line who had been so quick to sigh, so eager to move past her, so willing to pretend she wasn't there, were now standing a little differently, shoulders less stiff, gazes softer, as if seeing kindness had reminded them that they were capable of it too. She looked at Snoop one last time, like she wanted to make sure she would remember his face, like she wanted to hold onto the moment a little longer, like she wanted to say something more but couldn't find the words. And he just gave her a small nod, the kind that said, it's all good, no need to make it bigger than it is, just take it, keep moving, don't let this moment define you, let it be something that passes through your life like a breeze instead of a storm. As she finally stepped away, as the next customer moved up, as the transaction for whatever chips or soda or late-night impulse buy rang up on the register, the gas station started to shift back into normalcy. People pretending like they hadn't just witnessed something rare, like they hadn't just felt something shift inside them, like they weren't secretly wondering if they would ever step up the way Snoop just did if the moment ever called for it. By the time Snoop walked out the door, the night felt the same as it had when he walked in. Same cold air, same quiet streets, same low hum of life moving at its own pace. But inside, behind the glass, the woman was still standing by the pump, still gripping her receipt like it meant something, still staring at her car like it had just become a different kind of place, not a source of stress, but a way home without worry. And that was all that mattered. Snoop had seen it too many times before, people getting caught up in the need to repay a moment of kindness, like they owed something just because somebody stepped in at the right time, like they had to match generosity with something of equal value, like there was a balance that needed to be restored. But real kindness didn't work like that, didn't come with a receipt, didn't need anything in return, and that's why, before she could even try to figure out how to say something, before she could fumble for words that wouldn't change anything, before she could start thinking about what she was supposed to do next, Snoop had already moved past it, already let the moment go, already decided that whatever she felt like she needed to say wasn't actually necessary. There was a way people looked at you when they weren't sure whether to thank you or argue with you, when they weren't sure if they should accept something or try to return it, when they weren't sure if taking help meant they had somehow failed. And Snoop recognized that look the second she turned toward him again, the second her lips parted like she was about to say something, the second she hesitated just long enough to let him know that she was trying to decide if she was okay with how this had just played out. But before she could even get a full sentence out, before she could make it bigger than it needed to be, before she could add weight to something that was meant to be weightless, he just gave her a nod, smooth, effortless. The kind of nod that told her, without saying anything, that she didn't have to explain herself, that she didn't owe him anything, that there was nothing left to talk about. Some people do things just to hear gratitude, just to soak in appreciation, just to walk away knowing that someone else feels like they owe them something, but Snoop never moved like that, never needed the validation, never expected a reaction, because if you were really doing something out of the goodness of your heart, then you didn't need the world to acknowledge it. You didn't need the person you helped to put it into words. You didn't need anything other than the knowledge that you had made something just a little bit easier for someone who needed it. And that's why, even when she finally found her voice, even when she tried to say, "I don't even know how to," he cut her off before she could finish, not because he didn't want to hear it, but because she didn't have to say it. There are moments in life that don't need to be dissected, don't need to be analyzed, don't need to be turned into something bigger than they are. And Snoop knew this was one of those moments, knew that if he let her keep talking, she was going to make this about something other than what it was, knew that if he stood there long enough, she would start feeling like she had to make sense of something that didn't need to be figured out. So instead, he just shrugged, small, almost unnoticeable, like he wasn't thinking twice about it, like it was just another passing interaction, like it didn't need anything else added to it. She had expected something different, had expected him to wait for her to say something, had expected him to acknowledge the weight of the moment in a way that made it feel as big as it felt to her. But when he didn't, when he just gave her that same easy nod, when he just turned back toward the door like this was already in the past, when he didn't even hesitate before stepping away, she realized that this wasn't about him. This wasn't about making sure he felt appreciated. This wasn't about her proving that she understood the magnitude of what had just happened. This was just about him making sure she could fill up her tank and move on with her night. Snoop didn't wait, didn't look back, didn't linger in the space that had already served its purpose. He stepped away from the counter as smoothly as he had stepped up to it, let the door swing open in front of him without pause, let the night air hit his face without second-guessing whether he should have handled it any differently. Because he knew, better than most, that the real measure of an act of kindness isn't in how much gratitude you receive, it's in how quickly you can move past it, how easily you can leave it behind, how effortlessly you can let it be what it was meant to be and nothing more. She was still standing there when he walked out, still gripping the receipt like it was something heavier than just a slip of paper, still looking down at it like she was trying to understand how something so small could carry so much weight. And Snoop didn't have to see her face to know what she was feeling, didn't have to turn around to know that she was still processing, didn't have to hear her voice to know that she was still caught between relief and disbelief. Because sometimes, the simplest acts stay with people the longest. Sometimes the things you do without thinking become the things someone else never forgets. Sometimes what feels like a small gesture to you is the biggest thing in the world to somebody else. Inside the gas station, the line moved forward. The cashier went back to ringing up snacks and lottery tickets. The people behind her went back to pretending like they hadn't just witnessed something. Went back to pretending like the moment hadn't affected them. Went back to the regular rhythm of their night as if nothing had changed. But Snoop knew better. Knew that every person who had been standing there, every person who had watched the interaction unfold, every person who had seen the way he had stepped in without hesitation, was going to think about it later, was going to remember it in a quiet moment, was going to wonder, maybe for the first time in a long time, what they would have done if it had been them. Some things don't just disappear the second they're over. Some things don't just fade away like background noise. Some things settle into the air and stay there, changing the way people feel even after they've moved on. And Snoop could feel it, could sense the way the energy in that place had shifted, could tell that even though he had already left, even though he was already moving back toward his car, even though the world had technically gone back to normal, the moment was still sitting there, still fresh, still leaving an imprint on the space where it had happened. By the time he reached his car, by the time his fingers brushed against the handle, by the time the sound of the city filled his ears again, the moment had already settled into the past. But somewhere behind him, a woman was sitting in her car with enough gas to get home without worrying. A cashier was thinking about how he had handled that situation. A line of customers was replaying the interaction in their heads, and a world that usually felt a little too cold, a little too indifferent, a little too uninterested in people's struggles, had just reminded itself that sometimes it's not about grand gestures or big speeches. Sometimes it's just about being the person who steps in when no one else does. The engine hummed, the city kept moving, and Snoop didn't look back, didn't check to see if she was still there, didn't wonder if she would remember him or if she would tell anyone about what had just happened. Because it wasn't about that. It was never about that. It was just about making sure that, for one person, on one night, in one small moment, the world had felt just a little bit easier to exist in. Snoop didn't wait for her to say anything else, didn't turn back to check if she was still staring at the receipt, didn't pause to see if she would rush out to catch him before he left. He had already done what needed to be done, and that was enough. The gas station door swung shut behind him, the cool night air hitting his face as he stepped toward his car, hands slipping into his pockets, mind already shifting back into the rhythm of the night. Behind him, she was still standing by the counter, still processing, still holding onto something that wasn't just about the money, but about the fact that, for once, life had given her a break instead of another burden. By the time Snoop pulled out of the lot, headlights cutting through the quiet streets, the moment had already become part of the past, just another small thing that wouldn't make headlines, wouldn't be talked about, wouldn't change the world. But for her, it was something she would carry, something she would remember, something that might change the way she saw the world, even if just for a little while. And that was enough.